I'm James, 64 years old, and when my son Crew screamed, "Hope you can swim," as he paddled away with our only kayak, leaving me stranded on the opposite bank of the Yakima River here in Washington state, I knew exactly what kind of person he'd become. What he didn't know was that I'd been documenting his behavior for months, and by the time I made it back to civilization 3 hours later, I'd already made the phone call that would change everything. The trust fund I'd been building for him since he was born, gone. The monthly payments I'd been making on his Seattle apartment, stopped. The job I'd promised him at my precision tool manufacturing company, eliminated. But that was just the beginning. For 38 years, I'd been running James Precision Tools, manufacturing specialized cutting instruments for Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and other aerospace giants across the Pacific Northwest. Started in a garage workshop in Spokane, built it into a 7-figure operation that employed 43 people. My reputation in the aerospace manufacturing industry was rock solid. When major contractors needed precision components that could withstand extreme conditions, they called me. I'd missed family dinners, worked through holidays, and reinvested every spare dollar back into the business because I believed I was building something for my family's future. Crew was my only son, 28 years old, and I'd been supporting his lifestyle completely since he graduated college 6 years ago. His rent in Seattle's Capitol Hill district ran me $3,200 monthly. Car payment on his BMW, $850 every month. Health insurance, cell phone, groceries, entertainment. I covered everything while he pursued his artistic photography career. The trust fund I'd established when he was 18 had grown to $340,000. I'd planned to transfer ownership of James Precision Tools to him when I retired. Every month, I transferred $4,500 into his checking account just for living expenses. He'd never held a real job, never paid a bill, never worried about money because his old man handled everything. That Father's Day morning, we'd driven to our favorite spot along the Yakima River for our annual fishing and kayaking trip. It was a tradition we'd maintained for 12 years, ever since his mother passed. Same location, same routine. Drive out to the put-in point near Ellensburg, spend the day on the water, camp overnight, drive home Sunday. I'd bought all the equipment: 2 Wilderness Systems kayaks, professional fishing gear, camping equipment, permits for river access. The whole setup cost me nearly $8,000. Every year, I told myself this was quality time with my son, that eventually he'd mature into someone I could trust with my life's work. This year felt different from the moment we loaded the kayaks. Crew seemed agitated, constantly checking his phone, making calls he wouldn't explain. When I asked what was bothering him, he'd snap that everything was fine, then go back to his secretive behavior. During the drive, I caught fragments of phone conversations. "After this weekend, and won't be a problem much longer. And trust me, I know what I'm doing." Red flags were flying, but I ignored them. Fathers want to believe the best about their sons, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. We put the kayaks in the water around 10 in the morning. The river was running higher than usual due to spring snowmelt, moving fast with some challenging sections downstream. I'd navigated this stretch hundreds of times, but Crew had always struggled with the more technical rapids. Usually I stayed close to help if he got into trouble. This time he kept pulling ahead, acting like he knew the river better than his old man. When we reached the point where the river splits around a small island, he suddenly veered toward the left channel, the one with the dangerous boulder garden that I'd specifically told him to avoid. I watched my son deliberately guide his kayak through the rocks, moving with purpose toward the far bank. By the time I realized what was happening, the current had already swept me past the split. I was committed to the right channel, heading downstream, while he crossed to the opposite shore. When I looked back, he was dragging his kayak onto the bank and starting to walk upstream, away from the water. That's when he turned around and yelled those words that changed everything between us forever. The message was crystal clear. He'd planned this moment. My own son had deliberately stranded me on the wrong side of a fast-moving river, in terrain I couldn't cross safely, with no way to get back to our vehicle. As I watched him disappear into the trees, I realized this wasn't spontaneous teenage stupidity. This was calculated. This was intentional abandonment. This was my son trying to create a situation where his 64-year-old father might not make it home alive. The trust fund, the business, the monthly payments. Suddenly, every financial decision I'd made for him took on a sinister new meaning. Sitting on that riverbank, watching my son disappear into the Washington wilderness with our only way back to the truck, I had 3 hours of hiking ahead of me before I'd reach the ranger station. 3 hours to think about how I'd raised a son who could look his father in the eye and abandon him in a potentially life-threatening situation. As I started the long walk upstream along the rocky shore, dodging fallen logs and navigating steep terrain in my 64-year-old body, memories of our relationship began clicking into place like precision-machined parts in one of my aerospace assemblies. The monthly $4,500 deposits I'd been making into Crew's account for 6 years added up to $324,000 in direct support. Add the rent payments, car payments, insurance premiums, and miscellaneous expenses, and I'd invested over $600,000 in his adult lifestyle. But it wasn't just the money, it was the opportunities I'd created. 3 years ago, I'd offered him a management position at James Precision Tools starting at $85,000 annually. He'd turned it down, saying he needed to find himself creatively. Last Christmas, I'd given him a $15,000 professional camera setup to support his photography dreams. He'd used it twice. Every major holiday, every birthday, every milestone, I'd been the one footing the bill while he played the part of grateful son. Thanksgiving dinners at expensive Seattle restaurants, my credit card. Christmas gifts for his girlfriend, his friends, his artistic collaborators, my money. When he'd crashed his previous car into a telephone pole after a night of drinking, I'd covered the $8,000 in damages and legal fees without question. When he'd needed dental work after a skiing accident, I'd paid the $6,000 out of pocket because his insurance had limitations. The trust fund represented 30 years of careful investment and compound growth. I'd started putting money aside when he was born, reinvesting dividends, adding contributions every year. Boeing contracts were lucrative, and I'd always made sure a percentage went directly into Crew's future. The plan was simple. When I retired, he'd have the financial foundation to either take over James Precision Tools or start his own venture. Either way, he'd never struggle the way I had in my 20s, working construction jobs and night shifts to build my first workshop. But as I struggled over fallen trees and loose rock, forcing my aging knees to keep moving toward help, I started remembering conversations differently. Last month, when I'd mentioned updating my will to ensure everything transferred smoothly to him, he'd seemed unusually interested in the timeline. 2 weeks ago, when we'd discussed my retirement plans, he'd pressed for specific dates and financial details about the business valuation. During our drive to the river, I'd caught him photographing documents from my briefcase when he thought I was focused on driving. The life insurance policy I'd maintained through my business carried a $1.2 million payout with Crew as the sole beneficiary. James Precision Tools had been appraised at $2.8 million for estate planning purposes. The family home in Spokane, purchased 35 years ago and now worth $485,000, would transfer to him automatically. My retirement accounts, investment portfolio, and business assets totaled another $1.7 million. In total, my death would make Crew a wealthy young man to the tune of approximately $6.2 million. Standing waist-deep in cold Yakima River water, using a fallen log to cross a particularly treacherous section, the financial motivation became impossible to ignore. A 28-year-old who'd never held a real job, never earned his own money, never experienced financial pressure, suddenly faced with the possibility that his father might live another 20 or 30 years. 20 more years of having to ask permission for money. 20 more years of listening to lectures about responsibility and work ethic. 20 more years of watching his trust fund grow slowly instead of having immediate access to millions. The ranger station appeared through the trees after what felt like the longest 3 hours of my life. My knees were screaming, my back was locked up, and I was dehydrated despite drinking river water through my filtration system. The duty ranger, a woman named Sarah Martinez, took one look at my condition and immediately called for a medical evaluation. While the EMT checked my vitals, I explained the situation. My son had taken our only kayak and left me stranded on the opposite bank of the river. Ranger Martinez's expression changed when I described the deliberate nature of Crew's actions. "Sir, that's not an accident or poor judgment. That's abandonment of a vulnerable person in wilderness conditions. Depending on your physical condition and the weather, that could have been life-threatening." She began filling out an incident report, asking detailed questions about our planned itinerary, equipment, and Crew's behavior throughout the day. The Washington State Patrol would be notified. Search and rescue had been placed on standby in case I hadn't made it to the station. By 6 o'clock that evening, I was back in Spokane, sitting in my home office with my estate attorney, Margaret Chen, and my financial advisor, David Kowalski. Both had worked with me for over 15 years, helping structure the business and personal wealth I'd accumulated through 3 decades of precision manufacturing. Margaret's expression was grim as I recounted the day's events. "James, what you're describing sounds like attempted elder abuse with financial motivation. We need to take immediate protective measures." David opened his laptop and began pulling up my accounts. "James, given what happened today, we need to secure your assets immediately. If Crew was willing to abandon you in the wilderness, we have to assume he might attempt more direct financial manipulation." Within minutes, he'd frozen all automatic transfers to Crew's accounts. The monthly $4,500 deposit scheduled for the following Tuesday? Canceled. The rent payment for his Seattle apartment? Stopped. The car payment, insurance premiums, and credit card that I'd been covering, all terminated immediately. Margaret was already drafting emergency documents. "We're implementing an immediate trust restructuring. The $340,000 trust fund gets transferred into a protected vehicle that requires your direct authorization for any withdrawals. We're also adding a codicil to your will that requires a 24-month survivorship period before any inheritance becomes available." Her fingers moved quickly across her tablet, pulling up legal precedents for financial elder abuse cases in Washington state. The business presented a more complex challenge. James Precision Tools employed 43 people and had contracts extending 2 years into the future with Boeing and Lockheed Martin. I couldn't simply shut it down without affecting dozens of families and millions in contractual obligations, but I could change the succession planning. "Margaret, I want Crew's name removed from all business documents immediately. He's no longer a potential successor or beneficiary of any business assets." By 9 o'clock that evening, the legal and financial framework that had supported Crew's lifestyle for 6 years was completely dismantled. Bank accounts, credit cards, insurance policies, and automatic payments, all canceled. The apartment lease in Seattle was in my name as guarantor, so I'd be able to terminate it with 30 days' notice. The BMW lease was through my business, making it simple to arrange repossession. Every financial thread connecting me to his lifestyle had been severed. My phone started ringing around 10:30. Crew's voice was panicked when I answered. "Dad, my debit card got declined at dinner. There's some kind of problem with my account. The bank says all my automatic deposits have been stopped." His tone was confused, not yet understanding the magnitude of what had changed. He assumed this was a banking error, a technical glitch that his old man would fix with a phone call. "Son, there's no banking error. I canceled every payment, every transfer, every form of financial support I've been providing for the past 6 years." My voice was steady, calm, the same tone I used when explaining technical specifications to aerospace engineers. "When you abandoned me on the Yakima River today, you made a decision about what kind of person you are. I've made a decision about what kind of father I'm going to be going forward." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Then his voice came back, harder, more calculating. "You can't just cut me off. I'm your son, I'm your heir. Everything you've built belongs to me eventually anyway." The mask was slipping. The grateful, artistic sun was revealing something much darker underneath. "You think you can control me by threatening to take away money? I know what you're worth, old man. I know about the life insurance, the business valuation, everything. Crew, I want you to listen very carefully. As of today, you inherit nothing. The trust fund you've been counting on, protected in a legal structure you can't access. The business you assumed would be yours. My employees are now the beneficiaries through a profit-sharing arrangement. The life insurance policy? Beneficiary changed to charity." Each word was measured, precise, like the cutting tools my company manufactured. "You abandoned your father in wilderness conditions today. That tells me exactly who you are." He hung up without another word. Within an hour, my phone was buzzing with text messages. Threats, pleas, accusations, promises to change, the full emotional spectrum of someone watching their financial safety net disappear. But I'd spent 3 hours hiking along the Yakima River, and those 3 hours had given me perfect clarity about what needed to happen next. Margaret called at 11:15 to confirm that all legal documents had been filed with the appropriate courts and financial institutions. David sent an email confirming that asset protection measures were fully implemented. By midnight, 6 years of supporting an ungrateful son had been completely undone. Tomorrow, I'd start the process of finding out exactly what Crew had been planning for our Father's Day weekend and whether abandoning me in the wilderness was just the beginning of his scheme. Tuesday morning, I arrived at James Precision Tools at 6:30, 2 hours before my usual schedule. My plant manager, Rick Jameson, found me in the office reviewing personnel files and financial projections. "Boss, you're here early. Everything okay?" Rick had worked for me for 12 years, started as a machinist, and worked his way up to managing day-to-day operations. If anyone deserved to benefit from my life's work, it was employees like Rick who'd helped build the company's reputation. "Rick, I need you to gather the senior staff for a meeting at 8. We're implementing some major changes to our succession planning and employee benefit structure." I'd spent the night reviewing options with Margaret and David. The profit-sharing plan we'd designed would distribute business ownership among my 15 most senior employees over a 5-year period. Rick, with his 12 years of service and proven leadership, would become the largest shareholder after my retirement. While Rick organized the meeting, I reviewed the surveillance footage from our weekend security cameras. James Precision Tools maintained comprehensive security due to our aerospace contracts, cameras in the parking lot, lobby, and corridors leading to sensitive areas. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions about Crew's recent behavior. 3 weeks ago, he'd used his emergency key to enter the building after hours. Security timestamps showed him in my office from 11:47 p.m. to 2:23 a.m., photographing documents from my desk, filing cabinets, and computer screen. The photographs he'd taken included business insurance policies, contract valuations, employee records, and financial statements. He'd also accessed my computer, though our IT security logs showed failed attempts to break into password-protected files. What he had managed to photograph was enough to understand the company's worth, my personal net worth, and the life insurance policies tied to business ownership. My son had been conducting industrial espionage against his own father. David arrived at 7:45 with the final paperwork for our employee ownership transition. "James, the profit-sharing structure is solid. Your senior employees will own 60% of the company within 5 years, with you retaining 40% until you choose to sell your remaining stake. The life insurance beneficiaries have been changed to reflect the new ownership structure." He paused, reviewing his notes. "Your personal wealth is now completely protected from family claims through the trust restructuring." The 8 o'clock meeting with my senior staff was one of the most satisfying conversations of my career. 15 people who dedicated years to building James Precision Tools learned they were becoming partial owners of a multi-million-dollar aerospace manufacturing company. Rick's eyes filled with tears when I explained that his 12 years of loyalty and leadership had earned him a path to becoming majority owner when I retired. These were people who'd earned their stake through work, dedication, and proven competence. By 10 o'clock, Crew was calling again. His panic had evolved into desperation overnight. "Dad, I went to the apartment this morning and there's an eviction notice. The bank repossessed my car. My credit cards are all canceled. You can't just destroy my entire life over one stupid mistake." His voice was cracking, but I could hear calculation underneath the emotional appeal. He was trying to frame yesterday's abandonment as a momentary lapse in judgment. "Crew, I've been reviewing security footage from the office. 3 weeks ago, you broke into James Precision Tools and spent over 2 hours photographing confidential business documents." The silence on the line was complete. "You've been planning something that required detailed knowledge of my financial situation, business valuation, and insurance policies. Yesterday's abandonment wasn't spontaneous stupidity, it was attempted murder with financial motivation." His breathing was audible through the phone. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. The pleading son was gone, replaced by someone cold and calculating. "You think you're so smart, old man? You think cutting off my money solves anything? I know things about your business that your precious employees don't know. I know about the defense contract modifications you made without Pentagon approval. I know about the material substitutions that saved you money but violated specifications." The threats were empty. James Precision Tools maintained perfect compliance with all aerospace and defense regulations. But the willingness to make false accusations against my business confirmed everything I'd suspected. My son wasn't just greedy, he was dangerous. Someone willing to lie about federal contract violations would certainly be willing to arrange an accident for his father in the wilderness. Margaret called at noon with an update that made my blood run cold. "James, I've been researching Crew's recent activities. He consulted with 3 different attorneys in the past month, asking about challenging wills, contesting trust structures, and expediting inheritance claims. He's been planning this for much longer than we thought. Margaret's research revealed a pattern that went back 4 months. James, Crew didn't just consult attorneys about inheritance law. He met with a private investigator to research your business practices, hired an accountant to analyze your tax returns, and even contacted your insurance company asking hypothetical questions about claim procedures. Her voice was tight with concern. This wasn't a weekend impulse. This was a systematic investigation into how to profit from your death. The private investigator, James Mitchell, had actually contacted Margaret's office 2 weeks ago asking about my estate planning timeline. When she'd refused to provide information, he'd mentioned that his client was concerned about his father's health and wanted to ensure proper preparations were in place. At the time, she'd assumed it was routine family planning. Now we understood it was reconnaissance for something much darker. David had spent Tuesday afternoon analyzing Crew's financial situation from a different angle. James, your son has been accumulating debt we didn't know about. Credit cards in his name total $47,000. He owes $12,000 in back taxes from freelance photography income he never reported. There's a personal loan from a Seattle payday lending company for $8,500 at 36% interest. The picture was becoming clearer. Crew wasn't just accustomed to my financial support, he was desperate for it. But the most disturbing discovery came from Margaret's legal contacts in Seattle. James, Crew filed a preliminary application for emergency conservatorship over your affairs 3 weeks ago, claiming you were showing signs of mental incapacity and financial irresponsibility. The application was rejected because he couldn't provide medical documentation, but the attempt shows his mindset. He was trying to gain legal control over your assets before resorting to more direct methods. Wednesday morning brought confirmation of what I'd suspected about the weekend's events. Ranger Martinez called with the results of the Washington State Patrol investigation. Mr. James, we've located your kayak. It was found 3 miles downstream from where your son claims he left it, damaged beyond repair on the rocks. Either he deliberately destroyed it to eliminate evidence, or he lied about where the abandonment occurred. Either way, this wasn't an accident or poor judgment. The damaged kayak told a story. The hull showed impact damage consistent with being deliberately smashed against rocks multiple times. The paddle was snapped in half and thrown into deep water where search and rescue divers had to retrieve it. Crew had methodically destroyed every piece of equipment that could have been used for my rescue. If I hadn't been able to hike to the ranger station, if I'd been injured or overcome by hypothermia, there would have been no way for me to signal for help. Rick found me in the shop Wednesday afternoon, watching our machinists work on a complex Boeing wing component that required tolerances within thousandths of an inch. Boss, there's something you should know about Crew's visit 3 weeks ago. He didn't just photograph documents. He asked detailed questions about our safety protocols, insurance procedures, and what happens to the business if something happens to you. Rick's expression was troubled. I thought he was just showing interest in the family business, but looking back, those were strange questions. The safety protocol questions were particularly chilling. Crew had specifically asked about accident reporting procedures, workers' compensation claims, and how the business would continue operations if I were suddenly unable to work. He'd inquired about keyman insurance policies, business succession plans, and whether my death would trigger any automatic changes in ownership or management. These weren't casual questions from a son interested in his father's work. They were tactical intelligence gathering. Thursday morning, I received a call that changed everything. Detective Sarah Chen from the Seattle Police Department had been contacted by one of the attorneys Crew had consulted. Mr. James, Attorney Benjamin Walsh called our financial crimes unit yesterday. He said a young man claiming to be your son tried to hire him to challenge your mental capacity and gain emergency access to your assets. When Mr. Walsh refused, your son became agitated and made statements about taking care of the problem himself. Detective Chen was driving to Spokane to interview me about Crew's behavior and the weekend's events. The Washington State Patrol had already forwarded their report about the kayak incident, and the Seattle police were treating this as a potential elder abuse case with escalating threats. Mr. James, we take these situations very seriously. Adult children who attempt financial manipulation often escalate to physical threats when legal approaches fail. By Thursday afternoon, I had a complete picture of my son's 4-month campaign to access my wealth. The consultations with attorneys, the private investigator, the after-hours break-in at my office, the kayak abandonment. It was all part of a calculated plan. When legal methods failed, he'd moved to attempted murder disguised as an outdoor accident. The realization that I'd raised someone capable of killing his own father for money was devastating, but it also crystallized my resolve. Margaret called at 5 o'clock with the final piece of the puzzle. James, I've been in contact with the payday lending company in Seattle. Crew owes them $8,500 and the loan comes due Friday. If he doesn't pay, they'll file criminal charges for fraud. Apparently, he used forged employment documents to qualify for the loan. The timeline made perfect sense. He needed immediate access to cash, and his 64-year-old father's life insurance payout was the fastest solution to his financial crisis. Friday morning at 8:15, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, Crew's voice was different, desperate, but with an edge of genuine menace I'd never heard before. Dad, I need $10,000 transferred to my account today, or I'm going to have serious problems with some people in Seattle. His voice was shaking, but there was something calculated underneath the panic. These aren't the kind of people who accept payment plans. Son, the people you borrowed money from knew you had no legitimate income when they approved that loan. They were counting on your father bailing you out. I'd spent Thursday evening with Detective Chen reviewing the timeline of Crew's financial desperation. But that was before you tried to murder me on the Yakima River. Now you're going to face the consequences of your choices without my money cushioning the impact. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before he spoke again. You don't understand what you're doing. These people know where you live. They know about your business. If something happens to you now, it won't be my fault. It'll be because you refused to help your own son when he needed you. The threat was unmistakable, but it also revealed the desperation of someone whose primary plan had failed spectacularly. Detective Chen had warned me this conversation might happen. Mr. James, when financial manipulation fails and direct action is unsuccessful, they often try to create situations where they can claim your death was caused by external threats rather than family betrayal. It provides cover for their next attempt. She'd arranged for surveillance on my home and business, and our phone conversations were being monitored and recorded. By 10 o'clock, Crew was in my office parking lot. Security cameras captured him sitting in a borrowed car, making phone calls and watching the building. When Rick approached to ask if he needed assistance, Crew had rolled down his window and said, "Tell my father he's making a mistake. Tell him family is more important than money, and some decisions can't be undone." Rick's hands were shaking when he relayed the message. "Boss," he looked different, angry in a way I've never seen before. "Maybe you should call the police." But Detective Chen was already en route from Seattle with a King County Sheriff's deputy who specialized in family financial crimes. The net was tightening around my son's schemes, and he was running out of options. The afternoon brought a phone call that clarified everything. Margaret had received contact from attorney Benjamin Walsh, the Seattle lawyer, who'd reported Crew's threatening behavior. "Ms. Chen, I feel obligated to share additional information about your son's visit to my office. He didn't just ask about challenging his father's mental capacity. He specifically asked about inheritance timelines following accidental death and whether life insurance companies investigate outdoor recreation fatalities." Walsh's detailed notes from their consultation painted a picture of premeditated planning. Crew had asked about the difference between suicide exclusions and accidental death benefits in life insurance policies. He'd inquired about how quickly estates could be settled if death occurred during outdoor activities with no witnesses. He'd even asked about the legal definition of gross negligence versus criminal intent in cases where family members survived dangerous situations while others didn't. At 4:30, Detective Chen arrived with Deputy Michael Torres from the King County Financial Crimes Unit. We spent 2 hours reviewing the complete timeline: Crew's debt accumulation, the legal consultations, the office break-in, the kayak incident, and the escalating threats. Torres had seen similar cases before. "Mr. James, adult children who attempt inheritance acceleration through staged accidents usually make multiple attempts. The kayak incident was probably his first try, not his only plan. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage of the office break-in, records of attorney consultations focused on suspicious death scenarios, the deliberately destroyed kayak, witness statements about threatening behavior, and recorded phone conversations containing explicit threats. Detective Chen had enough evidence to obtain arrest warrants for attempted murder, elder abuse, and financial fraud. But first, they wanted to give Crew one final opportunity to incriminate himself completely. Mr. James, we'd like you to call your son and arrange a meeting. We'll have surveillance in place, and we want to hear what he says when he thinks he's convinced you to restore his financial support. The goal was to record him detailing his plans or making additional threats that would eliminate any possibility of claiming the weekend's events were accidental. I called Crew at 6 o'clock. Son, I've been thinking about what you said this morning. Maybe we should meet and talk about finding a solution to your situation. My voice was carefully neutral, giving him space to believe I was reconsidering my position. Why don't you come to the house tonight? We can discuss this like adults. His relief was audible through the phone. Dad, I knew you'd come around. I knew you wouldn't let your only son get hurt over money. I'll be there at 8 o'clock and we can work everything out. The confidence in his voice was chilling. He genuinely believed that threatening his father's life was a legitimate negotiation tactic. By 7:30, Detective Chen had positioned surveillance equipment throughout my house. Deputy Torres was stationed in an unmarked car across the street. I sat in my living room, wearing a wire, waiting for my son to arrive so law enforcement could record his confession to attempted murder. Crew arrived at 8:15, parking his borrowed Honda in my driveway, with the confident swagger of someone who believed he'd successfully manipulated his father into submission. Through the window, I watched him check his appearance in the car's mirror, adjusting his expression to project the right combination of gratitude and humility. He had no idea that Detective Chen was monitoring every word through the surveillance equipment positioned throughout my living room. When I opened the front door, his smile was practiced and hollow. Dad, I'm so glad you called. I knew deep down that you'd never abandon your own son, no matter what mistakes I might have made. He embraced me with theatrical warmth, but his eyes were calculating, already moving past this conversation to the financial relief he expected to receive. I've learned so much from this experience. I realize now how much I've taken your generosity for granted. We sat in the living room where I'd raised him, where I'd helped him with homework, where we'd watched Sunday football games for years. The irony wasn't lost on me that this room, filled with memories of better times, would become the place where my son confessed to attempted murder. Crew, before we discuss any financial arrangements, I need to understand what really happened at the river. Tell me exactly what you were thinking when you left me stranded. His carefully prepared explanation was smooth and rehearsed. Dad, I panicked when the current separated us. I thought you were right behind me, and when I realized you were stuck on the other side, I froze up. I should have thrown you the rope or found a way to get back across, but I was scared and made a stupid decision. Every word was delivered with practiced sincerity, but his body language told a different story. Relaxed posture, steady eye contact, no signs of genuine remorse. Son, the Washington State Patrol found our kayak 3 miles downstream, completely destroyed. The paddle was broken in half and thrown into deep water. How do you explain equipment being deliberately damaged if this was just panic and poor judgment? I kept my voice neutral, giving him rope to hang himself with his own explanations. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. The current must have carried it further than I thought. Maybe it hit rocks and got damaged naturally. Dad, why are you interrogating me like this? I thought we were here to work things out, not relitigate every detail of a bad day. His voice was rising slightly, the first crack in his controlled demeanor. Crew, I've been reviewing your activities over the past few months. The attorneys you consulted, the private investigator you hired, the break-in at my office. This wasn't about panic on the river. This was about access to my money. And when legal methods failed, you decided to try a more direct approach. I leaned forward, watching his expression change as he realized how much I knew. The mask finally slipped completely. You think you're so fucking smart, don't you? You think you've got everything figured out? His voice was cold now, the grateful son persona abandoned entirely. Yes, I hired attorneys. Yes, I looked into your business. You're 64 years old, and you're sitting on millions of dollars while your son struggles with debt. What kind of father does that? Detective Chen's voice came through my earpiece. Keep him talking. We need him to detail the planning. So what was the plan, Crew? Leave me stranded in the wilderness and hope hypothermia or injury would solve your financial problems. I kept my voice steady, but inside I was grieving for the son I'd thought I knew. How long have you been thinking about killing your father for insurance money? He laughed, actually laughed, as if the question was absurd. Kill you? Dad, I never wanted to kill you. I just wanted you to realize how vulnerable you are, how much you need me in your life. The river thing was supposed to be a wake-up call. You'd get rescued, realize you could have died, and understand that life's too short to hoard money when your family needs help. But you destroyed the kayak and paddle. You eliminated every possibility of rescue except my ability to hike out on my own. What if I'd been injured? What if the weather had turned bad? What if I'd fallen crossing the river? Each question pushed him further toward admitting the truth. His composure cracked further. Look, maybe I got carried away, okay? Maybe I wanted you to be scared, to understand what it feels like to be helpless. You've controlled every aspect of my life with your money, and I wanted you to know what it feels like to have no control. The admission was getting closer to the truth, but he was still trying to frame it as psychological manipulation rather than attempted murder. Crew, you consulted attorneys about accidental death benefits in life insurance policies. You asked about inheritance timelines following outdoor recreation fatalities. This wasn't about teaching me a lesson. This was about collecting $1.2 million in life insurance money. I pulled out copies of the attorney consultation notes that Margaret had obtained. You researched the exact scenario you tried to create. Seeing the documents in my hands, his last pretense evaporated. You want the truth? Fine. Yes, I planned it. Yes, I knew exactly what I was doing when I left you on that riverbank. You're old, you're stubborn, and you're sitting on a fortune that should be helping your family right now instead of gathering dust in investment accounts. His voice was rising, anger replacing calculation. I gave you every opportunity to be a generous father, and instead you chose to be a selfish old man. Detective Chen's voice in my earpiece was satisfied. That's enough. We have what we need. The front door opened quietly as Crew continued his confession, too caught up in his anger to notice Detective Chen and Deputy Torres entering my living room. You think you've won something by cutting off my money? You think you've taught me some kind of lesson? His voice was getting louder, more aggressive. All you've done is forced me to find other solutions. That payday loan company isn't going to wait, and when they come looking for their money, they're going to find a lonely old man with millions in assets and no family protection. Mr. Crew James, you're under arrest for attempted murder, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Detective Chen's voice was calm and professional as she stepped into his line of sight, badge visible, hand resting on her service weapon. Deputy Torres moved to flank him from the other side, cutting off any possibility of escape through the back of the house. The transformation in Crew's face was instantaneous, shock, then rage, then a calculating look as he tried to process how completely his world had just collapsed. This is entrapment. You can't use anything I said here because you tricked me into coming. His legal knowledge from those attorney consultations was showing, but his understanding was fatally flawed. Deputy Torres was already reading him his Miranda rights while Detective Chen documented the scene with her body camera. Mr. James, you weren't coerced or deceived into making these statements. You voluntarily detailed your plan to abandon your father in wilderness conditions with the knowledge that his death would result in significant financial benefit to you. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Crew's last attempt at manipulation was directed at me. Dad, you can stop this right now. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding, that we were just having a family argument. Don't let them destroy your son's life over money. The pleading in his voice was genuine now, but it was too late for appeals to family loyalty. Son, you destroyed our relationship when you decided my death was worth $1.2 million to you. The family argument ended when you abandoned me on the Yakima River and hoped I wouldn't survive. I stood up from my chair, feeling older than my 64 years, but also strangely relieved. The man being arrested right now isn't the son I raised. He's someone who researched how to profit from his father's accidental death. Detective Chen was already coordinating with the King County Prosecutor's Office, while Deputy Torres secured Crew in the patrol car. The evidence they'd collected over the past week was overwhelming. Recorded confessions, attorney consultation records, security footage of the office break-in, physical evidence from the destroyed kayak, and witness statements from multiple sources. The charges would likely include attempted murder in the first degree, elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. By 10 o'clock, my house was quiet again, but everything had changed. Margaret arrived within an hour to review the legal implications for my estate planning. James, with these charges pending, we need to ensure there are no possible claims against your assets through criminal victim compensation or civil litigation. The trust restructuring we implemented this week will protect your wealth from any legal challenges. David called to confirm that all financial security measures remained in place. James, the asset protection protocols we established are holding perfectly. Your business transition to employee ownership is proceeding on schedule, and your personal wealth is completely insulated from this situation. The employees who dedicated years to building James Precision Tools would continue benefiting from their loyalty, while the son who'd tried to murder me for money would inherit nothing. Saturday morning, I drove to James Precision Tools to find Rick already in the office, reviewing production schedules for our upcoming Boeing deliveries. "Boss, I heard about what happened last night. The whole shop is talking about it." His expression was troubled but determined. "We want you to know that this doesn't change anything about our commitment to the company or to you. We're family here, and family protects each other." The contrast couldn't have been starker. 15 employees who'd earned my respect through years of honest work were stepping up to support me during a family crisis, while the biological son I'd supported financially for 28 years had tried to kill me for inheritance money. Real loyalty wasn't determined by blood relation. It was earned through consistent actions and mutual respect. Detective Chen called that afternoon with an update on the charges. "Mr. James, the King County prosecutor is filing attempted murder in the first degree based on the premeditation evidence we collected. The life insurance research, the attorney consultations about accidental death benefits, and his recorded confession establish clear intent to cause your death for financial gain." The potential sentence was 25 years to life, meaning Crew would likely spend the rest of his prime adult years in prison. The Seattle Payday Lending Company had also filed fraud charges based on the forged employment documents Crew had used to qualify for the $8,500 loan. Combined with the elder abuse and conspiracy charges, he was looking at multiple felony convictions that would follow him for the rest of his life. The son who'd expected to inherit millions would instead become a convicted felon with no financial resources and no family support. Sunday evening, I sat on my porch in Spokane, looking out at the same view I'd enjoyed for 35 years, but seeing it with completely different eyes. The son I'd raised, supported, and loved had calculated that my death was worth exactly $1.2 million in insurance money, plus $5 million in estate assets. But in trying to claim that wealth through murder, he'd lost everything: his freedom, his future, and any possibility of redemption. The employees at James Precision Tools, people like Rick, who'd never asked for anything more than fair wages and respect, were now positioned to build generational wealth through their ownership stakes in the company. Justice wasn't just about punishing the guilty, it was about rewarding those who'd earned it through integrity and hard work. 3 months later, I stood in the King County Superior Court as Judge Patricia Morrison sentenced my son to 28 years in prison without possibility of parole for 15 years. Crew had refused the prosecutor's plea deal, convinced until the final moment that his father would intervene to save him. As the bailiff led him away in shackles, he looked back at me with an expression I'd never seen before: pure hatred mixed with disbelief that his plan had failed so completely. The trial had revealed details that made his betrayal even more devastating. Phone records showed he'd been researching wilderness survival statistics, calculating how long a 64-year-old man could survive in Washington state conditions during late spring weather. He'd studied hypothermia, onset times, dehydration rates, and injury probabilities for elderly hikers on rocky terrain. The level of premeditation was chilling. My son had literally calculated the probability of my death with scientific precision. Detective Chen testified that Crew had made additional statements during booking that weren't admissible during trial, but painted a complete picture of his mindset. He told our intake officer that his father was too stubborn to die naturally, and that he was tired of waiting for his inheritance. He showed no remorse, only frustration that his plan hadn't worked. The detective's testimony eliminated any possibility that this had been a spontaneous decision made under financial pressure. James Precision Tools had thrived during the months of legal proceedings. Rick's transition to general manager had been seamless, and our employee ownership structure was attracting attention from other aerospace manufacturers interested in similar arrangements. Boeing had renewed our contract for an additional 3 years based on our consistent quality and innovative management approach. The business I'd built over 38 years was finally in the hands of people who valued it properly. The trust restructuring Margaret had implemented proved its worth when Crew's court-appointed attorney attempted to challenge my mental capacity and claimed that his client had been responding to signs of my declining judgment. Medical evaluations, cognitive testing, and testimony from business associates established that I was completely competent and had made rational decisions to protect my assets from a dangerous family member. The attempted inheritance claim was dismissed with prejudice. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from Crew in the Washington State Penitentiary. The handwriting was different, smaller, more cramped, reflecting the reality of his new circumstances. Dad, I've had time to think about what I did, and I understand now that you had no choice. I let money and desperation turn me into someone I never thought I could become. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I finally understand what I destroyed. The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing his daily routine in protective custody, his work in the prison laundry, and his plans to earn a business degree through the correctional education program. I know I can never undo what I tried to do to you, but I want to prove that the son you raised is still somewhere inside the criminal I became. Maybe someday I can earn the right to call you father again, even if I can never earn your forgiveness. I read the letter twice, then filed it in the folder Margaret maintained for any post-conviction communications. The words sounded sincere, but Crew had always been skilled at saying what people wanted to hear. 15 years in prison might genuinely reform him, or it might simply teach him to be more careful about expressing his true feelings. Either way, the son who'd researched the probability of my death had made choices that couldn't be unmade. Rick knocked on my office door that afternoon with quarterly financial reports that exceeded our projections by 12%. Boss, the employee ownership structure is driving productivity and quality improvements we never anticipated. People work differently when they're building something for themselves rather than just collecting paychecks. His smile was genuine, reflecting the satisfaction of someone whose loyalty had been rewarded with real opportunity. The contrast between Rick's letter and Crew's letter was striking. Rick's quarterly reports detailed concrete achievements, measurable improvements, and specific plans for expanding our aerospace contracts. Crew's prison letter contained apologies, promises, and emotional appeals, but no evidence of genuine change or growth. Actions versus words. The same distinction that had defined their characters throughout my relationship with both men. Margaret called that evening with news that the state of Washington had officially closed all investigations related to Crew's case. James, the prosecutor confirmed that your son accepted full responsibility and provided complete cooperation with their investigation. There are no outstanding charges, no pending appeals, and no civil litigation possibilities. You're completely clear of any legal complications. The financial protection measures we'd implemented had proven unnecessary but wise. The trust restructuring, asset protection protocols, and business ownership transition had created an impenetrable barrier between my wealth and any potential claims from Crew's criminal actions. More importantly, they'd ensured that people who deserved to benefit from my life's work would continue building on what I'd started. 1 year after the Yakima River incident, I stood at the same put-in point where Crew had abandoned me. But this time, I wasn't alone. Rick, his wife Sarah, and their 2 teenage sons had joined me for a family kayaking trip. The family I'd chosen rather than the family I'd been born with. We launched 2 kayaks into the spring current, with Rick's boys sharing one boat while the adults took the other. As we navigated the same stretch of river where my son had tried to kill me, Rick's younger son asked about the significance of this particular location. "Mr. James, Dad says this place is important to you somehow. What happened here?" The question was innocent, curious, without any hidden agenda or calculated motivation. I realized this was what family conversations should sound like. Honest questions seeking genuine understanding. "This is where I learned the difference between people who care about you and people who care about your money," I told him. "Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most painful experiences." The boy nodded seriously, processing the answer with the same thoughtful approach his father brought to complex manufacturing challenges. 2 years after that Father's Day morning, when Crew screamed, "Hope you can swim," and paddled away with our only kayak, I sat in my new home office in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, watching the sun set over Lake Coeur d'Alene. The move from Spokane had been Margaret's suggestion, a fresh start in a location with no memories of betrayal. No reminders of the son who'd calculated that my death was worth $6.2 million to him. The house was smaller than my previous home, but it was mine in a way the Spokane house had never been after Crew's violation. James Precision Tools was thriving under Rick's leadership. Last month, he'd called with news that Boeing had selected us as their exclusive supplier for a new wing component that would generate $2.8 million annually for the next decade. Boss, we're hiring 12 new employees and expanding the shop floor by 30%. The employee ownership model has created a workforce that thinks like owners because they are owners. Rick's pride was evident in every quarterly report, every expansion announcement, every quality award the company earned. The trust fund that had once contained $340,000 for Crew now supported a scholarship program for children of James Precision Tools employees. 8 kids had received full college tuition over the past 2 years, including Rick's oldest daughter, who was studying aerospace engineering at Washington State University. The money Crew had expected to inherit was instead creating opportunities for families who'd earned them through honest work and dedication. Detective Chen visited last month during a business trip through northern Idaho. Over coffee at a lakeside cafe, she updated me on Crew's prison record. Your son has been a model prisoner. No disciplinary issues, consistent work performance in the laundry, making progress toward his business degree. But that's not unusual for first-time offenders serving long sentences. The real test will come if he ever gets parole after 15 years. The detective's assessment was professionally cautious, but her personal opinion was more direct. Mr. James, in 23 years of investigating family financial crimes, I've learned that people who research the probability of their parents' death for monetary gain don't typically develop genuine empathy later. They get better at hiding their motivations, but the fundamental selfishness rarely changes. Your decision to protect your assets and cut all contact was correct. I still received letters from the Washington State Penitentiary every few months. Crew's most recent communication detailed his completion of an associate degree in business administration and his appointment to a prison work crew supervisor position. Dad, I know my words probably don't mean much after what I did, but I want you to know that I understand now what real work feels like. Managing 12 inmates in the kitchen operation has taught me about responsibility and leadership in ways I never learned during those years you supported me. The letters always ended with variations of the same request. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday you might consider allowing me to prove that I've changed. I filed each letter without responding, the way I'd filed business correspondence from vendors who'd tried to defraud James Precision Tools. Some relationships, once broken by fundamental betrayal, couldn't be repaired by good intentions or behavioral improvements. Last Sunday, Rick's family joined me for Father's Day dinner at my favorite Coeur d'Alene restaurant. His sons, now 19 and 16, had grown into young men who understood the value of work, respect, and earned achievement. The older boy was studying mechanical engineering on a James Precision Tools scholarship, while the younger was working part-time in our shop to learn manufacturing processes before starting college next year. Watching Rick's boys interact with their father, I saw what healthy family relationships looked like. Mutual respect, genuine affection, shared values, and trust built through consistent actions rather than financial dependence. Rick had raised sons who contributed to family conversations instead of calculating their inheritance value. The contrast with my own parenting experience was stark but instructive. The phrase, "hope you can swim," had become shorthand in my mind for recognizing authentic versus manipulative relationships. When someone showed genuine concern for my well-being, I remembered Crew's callous abandonment. When someone offered help without expecting compensation, I thought about his calculated research into accidental death benefits. The traumatic experience had given me a framework for evaluating human character with precision. Margaret called last week with news that would have been devastating 2 years ago, but now felt like final closure. James, Crew's parole attorney, has filed a preliminary application for sentence reduction based on his educational achievements and prison work record. It's unlikely to succeed, but they're required to notify you of any legal actions related to his case. The notification was routine legal procedure, but it reminded me that even from prison, he was still trying to manipulate the system for his benefit. David's quarterly financial report showed that the asset protection measures we'd implemented had generated better returns than my previous investment strategy while providing complete security from any potential claims. James, your net worth has increased by 18% since the trust restructuring. Sometimes protecting your wealth from bad actors also protects it from bad investment decisions. The money Crew had tried to steal through murder was growing faster under professional management than it ever had under my direct control. This morning, I kayaked alone on Lake Coeur d'Alene, paddling through calm water under clear Idaho skies. The solitude was peaceful rather than lonely, reflecting 2 years of learning to value relationships based on character rather than biology. The employees at James Precision Tools, neighbors in my new community, and friends I'd made through local hiking groups had become my chosen family, people who'd earned my trust through consistent actions rather than demanding it through blood relation. When people ask about my son, I tell them simply that he made choices that ended our relationship permanently. I don't elaborate on the attempted murder, the inheritance research, or the calculated betrayal. Those details belong to law enforcement records and court transcripts. What matters now is the life I've built with people who understand that family loyalty is earned through behavior, not inherited through genetics. The phrase that changed everything, "Hope you can swim," had taught me the most valuable lesson of my 66 years. When someone shows you who they really are through their actions, believe them completely and protect yourself accordingly. Some bridges are meant to be burned, and some relationships are meant to end. The freedom that comes from accepting those truths is worth more than any inheritance, any family tradition, or any obligation to forgive the unforgivable. If you enjoyed this story of justice and family betrayal, please subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to cut ties with family members who put money above your well-being? Your experiences might help others facing similar difficult decisions.